Why is it that so many autistic women go undiagnosed until much later in life than autistic men? And how can this help men receive an adult diagnosis? Let's find out. Welcome, my stars of Orion. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Orionkelly, that autistic guy. I'm all about providing validation and support for autistic people and their loved ones. Simply put, autism doesn't have a single presentation. It's a spectrum. But did you know that autism can often look different in women compared to men? Now, this difference has led to many women being misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, or entirely overlooked for years. For some, their whole life. So let's chat about the key differences between how autism manifests in women and men, why these differences exist, and how they can help adults receive a late autism diagnosis, men or women. Let's start out with the orthodox approach, the historical approach, and talk about how autism commonly presents in men. So some common traits in autistic men. Now, many of the early diagnostic criteria were developed by studying boys and, to some degree, studying men, which means these are the traits that people tend to recognize first. A classic trait, social communication challenges. So autistic men may struggle with understanding social cues like body language, facial expressions, tone of voice. I like to talk about things that are unwritten, conventions, rules everyone seems to know but you. These can be signals. We send them with our body, like non-verbal signals. Okay, another key autistic trait for men is special interests and routines. Autistic men are often associated with having intense, focused interests. Now, these intense, focused interests dominate our time. An example, you might collect things. You might want to be the best at a particular game, right? I mean, a gamer. So you're a gamer and you want to dominate a game. You want to master the video game. You might want to become an expert in a technical subject. It could be astronomy. It could be coding. These type, you don't want to know about it. You don't want to learn about it. You want to know everything about it. And these special interests can be a source of joy, but may also lead to isolation. Yes, social isolation, because quite often they don't align with neurotypical social norms. If you have an intense, focused interest or interests, unless anyone else on the planet wants to hear anything about them, which is usually unlikely, what have you got to give? The herd doesn't want you because all you want to talk about is a game or the universe. Okay, we heard what you said, but you're still going about it. It's been an hour. Another key autistic trait in men often used is stimming behaviors. Now, autistic men may tend to engage in more visible stimming behaviors. So when we talk about stimming, the generic response is like, go back to movies. Okay, so that must be rocking, tapping, hitting, doing. Okay, not that those things aren't real, but I guess the point here is autistic men may be less judged by society than women if we are fidgeters, if we're nervously fidgeting. That's stimming. If we're self-soothing ourselves, self-stimulatory behavior that soothes us when we are dysregulated, we're going to keep doing that. And so we don't really care what other people think, but people don't judge us as much. And of course, this becomes something that's very important to us. Now, for me, would I be judged if I was a woman more if I borderline self-harm my own skin? I pick and pick and pick until it bleeds and scabs and comes back, and then I pick it again, right? And that's my way of regulating. That's my way of stimming. The greatest stimming tool ever invented for me personally was me. It's like, you give me some putty, it's like, great, thank you. Next, I'll go back to my thumb, right? This is something that I do. Now, would I be judged more? Yeah, probably, but also, if that's something you look for and you're a woman who maybe has learned to do it differently, again, you may fall through the cracks. Okay, so With regards to these types of repetitive actions, like we said, and we've always said this, they're not to annoy people, they're not to look odd or stand out, they're to help us manage our sensory input, to help us self-regulate ourselves, be that our emotions, our thoughts, to process. Sometimes people will say something to me and I'll start stimming, and kind of feel like I'm doing it now, to process what I'm hearing or what I'm going to say. So stimming is a critical part of an autism diagnosis for men. Now, social preferences. Many men are actually more comfortable in structured one-on-one interactions rather than with groups, large groups, unstructured social settings. Autistic men often find way more comfort and peace either alone or in very specific, pre-planned, structured kind of one-on-one time. Maybe it might be a group of 3 max, okay? We like to avoid group activities. We don't like gatherings and parties. That doesn't help us. That is not our element. We would much prefer, in general terms, and speaking from my experience, spending alone time or time with your family or a small, trusted circle of friends. But how about some common traits in autistic women? Now, autism in women can often present differently, which is why it's frequently missed or misdiagnosed. Women are more likely to mask their traits, more likely to blend into social environments at the expense of their mental health, at the expense of a diagnosis. Let's go through a few key traits in autistic women. First up, let's talk about masking and social mimicry. Now, autistic women often learn to mimic neurotypical behaviours to fit in. How do they do that? Autistic women are taught from a young age to observe, to potentially be seen and not heard, to look, to listen. Autistic women study how their peers interact, how they talk, laugh, literally down to the laugh, how they express emotions. Again, not everyone, just some general points here to help you dissect the difference. So I find that the research, and people will often say that it seems like autistic girls, let alone women, just girls, have actually become really good at replicating the patterns of neurotypical peers. And why do they do that? To avoid standing out. Autistic men seem to not have any issues with standing out, doing autistic things, whereas autistic girls from a young age were told, do not stand out. Look at your peers. They won't say neurotypical, but look at the girls around you. They might even realize, if I look at the girls around me, I've got to do the things they do. I've got to try and replicate these patterns, these performances, emotions, behaviors, and then I'll fit in. But it's not even about fitting in or being accepted. It's just about basic survival of just don't stand out. Now, the impact of this masking on autistic women, well, autistic people in general, is profoundly detrimental. Okay, so this constant effort to suppress, to mask, to be someone you're not, to hide your autistic self, leads to exhaustion, anxiety, mental health challenges and issues. And you know what? It actually leads to a sense of losing your own self-identity, as in your own authentic self. You don't even know who you are. Many late-diagnosed autistic people spend quite a lot of time, post-diagnosis, trying to work out, who am I? Like, who actually am I? And who have I been? Because it's so much to unravel, we may never get there before we die. This is the sad reality of late diagnosis. Okay, so we talked about special interests for autistic men. Now let's talk about special interests, except let's talk about it through the lens of special interests as a key trait in autistic women that appear socially acceptable. Bit of a difference here. So while autistic men might just simply focus on their passions, that they don't care about other people, like technical passions, niche topics that someone might say, what are you, a science nerd, or who cares? What do you need to know this for? Right? Autistic women, and this is not obviously in all cases, it's just a general discussion, autistic women's special interest can often be seen as more socially typical. Okay, so, autistic girls may be more interested in animals, fashion. Autistic women may be more interested in, the arts, literature, psychology. Psychology is a big one. There's not many late diagnosed autistic people that I've met personally, men or women, that aren't interested at least in psychology. I'm really interested in it. And I know a lot of late diagnosed autistic people become almost obsessed about learning more about the psychology of the brain. And this is the thing, right? The study of psychology, being the study of the brain, is already working on a premise that's incorrect. Because there isn't a brain. Neurotypical, autistic, that's just two types of brains. There are people who are not neurotypical and who are not autistic. There's many brains. So an autistic woman may have an intense interest in a TV show, a certain genre of book, but her depth of knowledge might go unnoticed. For example, there's a TV show that everyone loves at the moment. Now, this autistic woman may utterly love it too, have a real passion for it, okay? And may, as a result of that, go above and beyond, binge it, watch it 1,000 times, get to know everything, search the history of the characters, know absolutely everything about it. But her depth of knowledge will go, for the most part, unnoticed because it actually just aligns with a cultural norm, with a pop culture moment. Oh, well, everyone knows everything about this show. You do? Awesome. Let's be friends. Let's watch it together. You see how that's different? It lines up in a way that actually hides, I'm an autistic woman here. Another key trait for autistic women is internalized social struggles. So women may struggle with social communication as autistic people do, but they may internalize their challenges instead of outwardly showing frustration. Okay, so you may have seen autistic kids, autistic boys, autistic men who may struggle with social communication and interaction, maybe with you as their partner. You may be a neurotypical partner. You may be an autistic partner. And they're more than happy when they literally are having a situation where you are not understanding what they're saying, you are not getting it, and there might be a meltdown or they might struggle and become dysregulated. It could be, they could have autistic rage. There's so many different factors here, right? And that is something that I think is actually quite common. Now, for autistic women, that might not happen as much. Of course, it'll happen, but it might not happen as much, or it might be more internalized. It's happening, but it's a shutdown instead of a meltdown. It's happening, except you just hold the rage in and squeeze your fists tight or something, right? So instead of saying you don't understand a joke or you don't get that sarcasm, you don't want to stand out by saying I don't get it, so you just laugh. You just laugh at the joke to avoid standing out. Yeah, I'm going to play along. Yeah, I get it. I don't get it. You know what I'm saying? Another one is subtle stimming behaviors. So stimming, repetitive movements and behaviors, a key trait for autistic people. Now, for women, it is again, but women are more likely to engage in subtle stims. So this could be things like playing with or twirling their hair. Neurotypical people will tell you if a woman is playing with her hair, that must be a good sign, right? Well, okay, in a neurotypical world, maybe, but not everyone's on a dating show or in a Hollywood love movie or something, right? So, playing with your hair, twirling your hair could be a sign of dysregulation. And stimming, tapping their fingers, fidgeting with their jewelry, their necklaces, rings, things like that, earrings. In other words, an autistic woman may twist her ring or rub her hands together to self-soothe during a stressful situation. And in many ways, it can be seen through neurotypical eyes as, they're all good signs, when in fact they're actually dysregulated. They're actually in some degree of distress. So you can see how they can fall through the cracks as autistic women. But this particular trait in autistic women is a fascinating one. It's a hyper-focus on relationships. And remember we talked about autistic men and this idea of completely fine to be alone. And if I need to, I have my select safe crew, right? It could be my family or one or two friends. Now, in general terms, autistic women often place high importance on friendships or romantic relationships, sometimes to the point of burnout. So maybe you're an autistic woman. Maybe you can relate to this. Maybe you can't. An autistic woman may spend significant energy maintaining relationships, even if they're not fulfilling, even if they're abusive, even if the other person doesn't care. This idea, this hyper-focus on building and hanging on to maintaining relationships at their own peril of burnout, and worse still, mental health issues, mental health challenges. This is a big one, and it's a key difference. It's a key difference, but it's still such a stark trait. One more, then I want to talk about the overlapping traits of both men and women. That was weird. I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, misdiagnosis and overlooked diagnosis. So autistic women are frequently misdiagnosed with conditions like anxiety, depression, borderline personality disorder. What are you saying, Orion? I'm saying a key autistic trait for autistic women can be being diagnosed with other conditions. Co-occurring conditions is one thing, but going somewhere and being told, oh, no, you're just anxious, you're just depressed, or you have borderline personality disorder, you have this and you have that. They could be right, they could be wrong. But if you are experiencing that and they don't fit, they don't make sense, that it isn't going where it needed to go. Like, okay, treat me for this. No, not working. It's another key trait. And this is big for autistic women. The constant misdiagnosis, overlooking one thing and labeling it another. So, an autistic woman seeking help for chronic social exhaustion, for example, may simply be treated for anxiety, when in fact, the underlying cause is they're autistic. We've covered autistic traits in men, we've covered autistic traits in women, but now let's cover overlapping traits in both autistic men and women. Because, sure, autistic men and women often present differently. But did you know, and I'm sure you did, there are many traits that overlap. Again, reminding us that autism is a spectrum. It's not a set of rigid criteria. It's not linear. It's a spectrum. Overlapping traits in autistic men and women. Number one, sensory sensitivities. Bottom line, both men and women experience heightened or diminished sensitivity to sensory input. It's a given. Next, difficulty with social rules. Autistic people often find these unspoken social rules confusing. Well, why? Because no one tells them us. They're unspoken. What, you're supposed to just know them? Some people are actually born, neurotypical people, are actually born with the rules built in almost. So things like knowing when to start or end a conversation. No, I'm sorry, but I must have missed that class. I still don't know. It's one of the things I hate the most, starting talking to someone and finishing talking to someone, and even the idea of it. So you've got an autistic man or an autistic woman, and they can't understand why you're saying they're being rude when what they were being was honest or truthful or just them and talking to you in a good faith manner, in a positive way. So we don't know why telling you the truth or being, in your mind, blunt is a bad thing. No one told us these types of rules. It's a difficulty with social rules, and I think all late diagnosed autistic people, for the most part, have some sense that they were born without the rule book of life, and no one's prepared to give it to them. In fact, they do their best to keep it off us. Another overlapping trait, executive function challenges. Woo! Many autistic people struggle with executive functioning challenges. So things like organization, planning, time management. Why is that, Orion? Because executive functioning is a set of cognitive skills. That's skills up here. What's autism again? That's right. It's a neurodevelopmental disability condition. Oh yeah, so you're saying developing a set of cognitive skills is harder, takes longer, or, given the right circumstances, never got a chance to happen. How can we be anything else but bloody crap at executive functioning challenges? What happens? We miss deadlines, or we simply forget appointments. Now, this can be despite our best efforts. You could put 1,000 calendar reminders in 7 different devices and write it on 3 walls. Get a guy in a plane to put it in the sky. You could still forget that appointment. You probably have. Why? Because you're not stupid. You're not an idiot. You're autistic. Oh, I love that one. I hate appointments. Intense focus and passion for your interests. We can overlap that because we know that both autistic men and women experience hyperfocus on their passions. So spending hours on a passion project and losing all track of time or even all awareness of those around you is an absolute key core trait and experience of both autistic men and women. Emotional regulation issues. So overlapping trait number 5. Both groups, be that autistic men or women, struggle to manage emotions, which obviously then leads to things like meltdowns, shutdowns, autistic rage. Have enough of those over a long period of time, you will experience autistic burnout. Yes, it's not just autistic boys that can have emotional regulation issues. Sure, my version of a meltdown is not close to the same as my 10-year-old son's version of a meltdown. But he's 10 and I'm 145. Do you see the difference? Right? Autistic men and women struggle to regulate and manage our emotions, how we process them, how we interpret them, how we convey them, withdrawing completely after an emotionally draining event. Hands up if over the holiday period, Christmas period, this happened to you. I mean, I got both hands up. And I guarantee you, it's not just men putting their hands up. You had some sort of event, gathering, and it was draining because you had it over the holiday period. And once it was finished and everyone was gone, like people didn't know where you were for the next 7 years. I mean, like, you just wanted to go, right? And again, that's an example. See, other people may experience the same thing as neurotypical people, but were able to stay engaged in whoever was there or left or their life. And you see how this adds up? Now, the obvious elephant in the room is not my next guest. What I'm saying is the elephant in the room is men versus women, yet here's Orion. So I thought I should get a big-time female autistic advocate. Unfortunately, Taylor didn't respond to my emails. So I've got Jen from Neurodivergent. That's all a lie. My bestest friend, Jen. Jen, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Orion. I appreciate it.
I need you to lift the intelligence, the sophistication level of this video. So I know you're going to do that for me. I'd like you, if you don't mind, I'm going to shut up now. You can be the representative for the women's side. Could you please share some of your lived experiences as an autistic woman as we talk about men versus women in diagnosis?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So I would venture to say that, obviously it's not a battle between men and women as far as, like who has it harder. I think the challenges are just different. So in sharing my own story, I would venture to say that one of the things that I feel off the bat are that it is, I think for females, it's less externally observable and it's more internally felt. And so there are different challenges that we face in regard to the social expectations that are placed on us, especially as a mother and a wife. I'm expected to be very nurturing and caring. And before my diagnosis, I struggled with not understanding why I couldn't provide like the same emotional output that a lot of other females seem to be able to do. And so I guess you could kind of describe it like a doctor that has no bedside manner in a regard that like he'll get the job done, but he's not going to sit at your bedside and like comfort you. So when my kids came to me and they were crying over something, most women, comfort their children. And I was more likely to, I could do acts of service, but I struggled more with the emotional component of things and always kind of felt more robotic, and I didn't really understand why that was. And now I know that it's because I have a much more analytical outlook on things. And once I finally got my diagnosis after my son was diagnosed, I realized that, it wasn't the reason why I didn't measure up to what most women look like wasn't because I was a bad person. It was because, I maybe have more of an analytical mindset and less of an emotional mindset, which is what like most women are, supposed to have, I guess you could say. And so when we talk about it being so internally felt and we kind of mask and hide these things so much more. I think that kind of makes sense. Some of the statistics that we see in regard to autistic women having like a higher rate of suicide and self-harm attempts as opposed to even autistic men, like definitely more than the general population, but even higher than autistic men because we are more socially motivated and we try a lot harder, and it's tough. You know what I'm saying?
Having a autistic son, or having a son diagnosed autistic, and that helping you, did you still though run into barriers where they said, well, sure, your son is, but you know, you're a woman and a mum and you're married, you're not like him, so you can't be. Did that come into play?
Luckily, it did not for me, but I am unique in that area because most of the times women, you know, they do have a harder time getting into the psychologist office to be evaluated in the first place because they're referred for evaluations less often. But yeah, my son was how I found out that I was on the spectrum after he was diagnosed. And, you know, it's interesting because, like, kind of going back to what I was talking about before about, like, being less emotional and everything like that, you know, there was this whole theory in the 60s or whatever put forth by, like, Leo Kanner et al., where he was basically, or there were a lot of people that thought that, you know, a lack of maternal warmth was what caused autism. Really, what they may have been observing was mothers like me who were autistic and had autistic children. And so, you know, this picture of what a woman is supposed to be like, you know, as a mother and everything else kind of got turned into this whole theory of how autism developed that was very widely, you know, accepted in the social circles and in the medical circles. And now we know it's hereditary. And so I luckily did not have a lot of the misdiagnoses that I hear a lot of other women experience in regard to bipolar or, you know, anxiety or depression because I had a son diagnosed first. Actually, I did have a diagnosis of depression prior to my son getting diagnosed. And it was weird because I didn't feel like I was depressed. I felt like I was actually pretty happy most of the time when I was by myself and not comparing myself to other people. And I didn't understand why that was. And I actually did get put on antidepressant medications in my early 20s because I just felt like a crap human being. But looking back now, I realize that was in comparison to other people and me not understanding why I couldn't get on in the world like a lot of other people are able to. Because when I was in social situations or comparing myself to other people, I felt happy. So it was weird because I was in on a depression study for a new medication one time. And the nurse came in and she told me, I have good news. You're not depressed based on all these answers that you have provided us with. So, you know, unfortunately, you can't participate in this study. And I busted out in tears because I was like, I don't understand what you're telling me this because I'm not doing okay, you know? And that, looking back, that experience was probably because I realize now I wasn't depressed. I was just feeling so different and othered in the world, you know? So I guess I did have, it's funny, like I'm seriously remembering this as I'm talking to you, that I did have a misdiagnosis journey, I guess, to some extent, but then I had
Well, don't minimize it. I mean, it happened. It's not something to minimize. It's a reality. It happened. And then what's funny is, you know, people can be medicated for something that is wrongly diagnosed and wonder why it doesn't work. It doesn't work because you think you're taking medicine for something that you've got, but you actually haven't got it. And then when you finally, here's an example, ADHD medication for those that decide to have it and have ADHD, they might say this has changed my life for the better, where people might go, but the medicine I got when I was diagnosed with depression made it worse. Like, that's the thing. It proves that not only is being misdiagnosed dangerous, but then being medicated through a misdiagnosis is potentially even more dangerous. Does that make sense?
100%. It's crazy that I'm sitting here talking to you and had totally forgotten about my own misdiagnosis journey. Like, I always thought that I was so lucky to not have
Learn
received
more on Jen's next video, my misdiagnosis video, out next week.
Now that I've remembered. But yeah, I mean, honestly, like I thought that I was so lucky because you hear so many people talking about the bipolar, misdiagnosis. Anyways, so I guess I did to an extent. But after my son's diagnosis, I was able to, get officially diagnosed pretty easily after that point. And, I think before that point, I was judged quite a bit because it presents differently in me. I'm more analytical. So if I'm in a social situation, it's, are you like the B word? Are you a bitch? Because you're not smiling, you're not laughing, you're not acting like a fun, girl should. Oh, you think you're too hot to trot, and it's really because I'm observing and I'm trying to figure out what's going on, but we're overly judged as females. And so in those social situations, I'm expected to be a certain way. And if I'm not laughing and looking like a lot of other, or like I'm expected, then I'm a B word. Or if I am trying too hard because we are a little bit more socially motivated, then it's like, oh, she's ditzy because she's still, I still don't quite fit in. So it's like, if I don't try, then I'm a B word. If I try too hard, I'm ditzy because I'm still not fitting in and they can still tell that there's something off about me. Yeah, it's just a lot of things that, we really care about. We are more socially motivated. And so a lot of this is, like I said, it's less externally observable for us, but more internally felt. And it's understandable why we're missed a lot of times for diagnoses.
I mean, for men, we could be classed as, brooding. We're just a brooding male. Where for women, you're an ice queen, or you're, as you say, a refrigerator mum. Anyway, hey, there's one thing I wanted to ask you. The last thing was, I noticed when I was doing the video, he talked about how guys in relationships, it's kind of irrelevant, like one-on-one or whatever. We'll take it or leave it, where it seemed like a lot of autistic women were misdiagnosed because they kind of put this strong value on maintaining relationships, but it also kind of talked about how at their own detriment or peril, like they put massive amounts of effort into maintaining or keeping relationships alive regardless of the quality of the relationship, be that with family, or friends or whoever. Is that something that you understand or you can relate to?
100%. And I think that a lot of the reason for that is because we are more socially motivated. We're still less socially motivated than a non-autistic woman, but we are more socially motivated than autistic men. And so when women are supposed to be, again, going back to kind, nurturing, caring, and, having lots of friends, then that means that we put maybe too much effort into relationships. And I know that a lot of times women they seem like they have a lot of friends, but really they don't have the depth of relationships that a lot of neurotypical females might. So that can be another confusing factor as to why we get missed, because it looks like we have a lot of friends. It looks like we have, but it's their acquaintances, and the depths of those relationships aren't very deep.
Hey, thanks, Jen, for being so open and honest and sharing your experiences. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Orion. I appreciate it.
But to be frank, to be honest, because I get this question a lot. Hey, Orion, this video or this comment you made or this or that really sparked this aha moment. I think I'm autistic. What should I do? Now, the advice is you should go and see a medical practitioner, a healthcare professional, because they are charged to diagnose autism. But Orion, you just said that this is the problem. Their lack of knowledge or understanding of the nuances is the problem. That's correct. So my full advice is your next step is still a medical healthcare practitioner. But added to that, once you've done your research, you need to research. You need to look into medical practitioners who specialize in autism diagnosis for adults. But I've got a lot more info for you. Yeah, you can learn even more about autism diagnosis later in life. Just go and check out my freshly curated playlist, Autism Diagnosis for Adults.